Hello, and welcome back to today's workshop, Reader's Advisory, Ideas and Practice, presented by Booklist. My name is Susan McGuire, and I'm the Senior Editor for Collection Management and Library Outreach here at Booklist. We'd like to take a minute to thank our sponsors, Penguin Random House Library Marketing and Sourcebooks, for their generous support of this program. We will send out some additional resources and recommendations from our sponsors in tomorrow's follow-up materials, and we'll showcase some of those resources throughout the program. Before we begin our next program, I'd like to go over some technical details again. Links to all of today's slide presentations were included in the reminder email you received from Zoom 1 hour ago. To download them, please open that email, scroll to the bottom, and click on the links located there. We will send PDFs of all these slides, along with additional materials from our sponsors, to everyone tomorrow. If you have any trouble locating these materials, please contact us at webinars@booklistonline.com. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we encourage everyone to submit your technical questions in the Q&A box. Put questions for the panelists in the chat, and we will be sure to pass along any unanswered questions to our panelists after the webinar so they can follow up via email. Booklist offers closed captioning on all webinars. To enable or disable captions on your screen, please look for and click the captions icon on the toolbar mentioned earlier. From there, you can select show or hide captions in the menu that appears. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of the captions at any time by selecting subtitle settings. And finally, Booklist expects all participants to maintain an atmosphere of respect and fairness. Anyone who violates the standard of behavior, including engaging in any form of harassment, may, at the discretion of the organizers, be immediately removed. We have an entire afternoon of workshops planned today, all designed to keep you up to speed on both the ideas and practice that will enhance your RA game. You can see today's schedule on the screen. We are about to begin the Swoons and Screams session. And please note that you are welcome to attend any and all of these sessions and will receive a recording of every session tomorrow. So let's get started with our next workshop, Swoons and Screams, presented by Robin Bradford, Alex Brown, and Becky Spratford. Robin Bradford has found a home in building reader-focused popular collections in public libraries. She was recognized as RWA's 2016 Librarian of the Year, the Emerald City Writers Conference Librarian of the Year in 2022, and is dedicated to helping others discover a love of reading. She has worked with authors of all genres to help them get their titles into library collections, and wrote the Reader's Advisory Guide to Romance Fiction to help libraries spice up their romance collection and give readers great reader's advisory in this area. Alex Brown is a queer Black librarian, local historian, writer, and author. They are an Ignite Award-winning and Hugo Award-nominated writer and critic who covers speculative fiction and young adult literature for Tor.com, now Reactor, Locus Magazine, NPR Books, and elsewhere. They also write on topics such as queerness, Black history, librarianship, and pop culture. And Becky Spratford, MLIS, is a Reader's Advisory Specialist in Illinois, specializing in serving patrons ages 13 and up. She trains library staff all over the world on how to match books with readers through the local public library. She runs the critically acclaimed RA training blog, RA for All. She is under contract to provide content for EBSCO's novelist database and writes reviews for Booklist and a horror review column for Library Journal. Welcome, Robin, Alex, and Becky. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Susan, and hello, everybody. Welcome to Swoons and Screams, a webinar 4 years in the making. We planned this for 2020. Something happened. I can't remember what. We didn't get to it, but we are here now and we're ready to get this going. And here we are. So I am the Swoons. I will be talking to you about romance. Becky is the Screams. She will be talking to you about horror. And Alex will be talking about both of them, but from a teen perspective.
Wait, Alex, you have to unmute. Sorry, I thought I clicked unmute and I just muted myself. This is my section. We are going to be talking, like Robin said, about romance, about horror, about YA romance and YA horror. If you are on Book Talk, you've probably heard about horrormance. We're not going to get into that. It's a little too much for this. But also buy these books. They're amazing and wonderful. Go buy them right now. We're going to go over some can't miss titles as well, and we'll be answering your question. I don't know if I can see the chat without it showing on the screen, so I won't be looking at chat, but I'll let Robin and Becky go ahead and check for that for questions. So please put your questions in the chat as we go along. You don't have to wait till the end, and we'll try to get them as we go along.
And Alex, I'm pretty sure we won't see your chat, so try it and I'll tell you if it shows up. So let me,
sorry.
Oh wait, go back one.
There we go.
It's all of us together in this together. So first I want to just start something by talking to you about the fact that some of you might think, Robin is one of them. Why are horror and romance together? I know that you're not actually, but they are two completely different emotions. But we need to understand that neither genre works for its core readers if the books cannot make you feel real feelings. I like to say this about romance and horror all of the time. I like to say that it is amazing. We need to take a moment to just sit here and think about how authors take letters, put them together in words, make sentences that turn into paragraphs that in the end are books that literally make you feel like you're falling in love, have to leave your house because you're afraid it's haunted while you're reading it. Whatever that emotion is, they are real. And both of these genres have some complications with serving readers because of that, but are marked by that similarity that I want to make sure we don't lose sight of, even though we're going to talk about how they're all different. Also, both of these genres use a lot of adjectives. I like to say that they're full of adjectives, but they're not all, fancy pants words. Some of them are, but it's things that you can use to call up all 5 of your senses immediately. So, that's when we talk about spice level, but also, when there's lots of squishy, gory things there in the horror books, they're there so you can really feel the book. One time I read a book and I was like, you can smell this disgusting book. And I think I told Robin to make sure she didn't read it. So Robin, you're going to talk about a definition of romance, because just real quick, the slide before had our books, Robin and my books. There's a coupon. You're going to get the slides, buy them. And these are from our books. Oh, yeah. Right there. There you go. Thank you. Robin.
So the basic definition of romance is there's a central love story and it has an emotionally satisfying and optimistic ending. It's a 2-part definition and both parts are necessary for it to be a genre romance.
So, and then for me, when I did the second edition of the book, one of the things they made me do was write an actual definition of horror. And I like to say it was the hardest part of writing the book to get into one sentence. So what I like to talk about is that horror is a story in which the author manipulates the reader's emotions by introducing situations in which something speculative happens, and then that will threaten the protagonist and provoke terror in the reader. And when you get a longer version of my horror talk, I talk about, yes, I understand that some people think psychological suspense or even true crime are horrific. And yes, that is true. We're going to talk about doing that reader's advisory interview and figuring all that out. But at its core, there's something supernatural. It's stalking the reader and it's threatening stalking the protagonist, and it's threatening both the protagonist and the reader.
I just wanted to add to one little thing with romance. So I'm Ace Arrow. I'm not going to tell you what that is. You've got the internet. You can Google it. But a key factor in romance, the love story doesn't necessarily mean romantic love. It doesn't have to. Queer platonic, we all fall under the romance. So keep that in mind as you're doing your reader's advisory as well. I want to define YA, which a lot of people refer to as genre. Sometimes when I'm talking to my teens, I talk about it as a genre because that's how they understand it. And when you're doing reader's advisory, you don't really have time to let's actually talk about definitions. So, but I do want to define YA. YA is not actually a genre. A lot of people say, oh, this sounds like YA. There is no sound of YA. It is not a genre. It is a marketing term. That is all it is. And it's actually surprisingly easy to tell if a book is YA. The easiest way to do it, what is the publisher selling it as? Is it the publisher will tell you if the book is YA. You see book, well, it's got a teenager. It doesn't matter. It's got a child. It doesn't matter. It by Stephen King. is not middle grade fiction just because there are children in it. The one that I'm seeing right now, people recommending as YA is How to Shape a Dragon's Breath, which is fantasy. It is adult fantasy. It is not YA. It is not marketed as YA. It is not sold as YA. It is not comped to YA. It is not promoted as YA. In fact, there's a whole section in the book where they talk about how the protagonist does not see herself as a child or a teenager. She sees herself as an adult. So it's, like I said, it's really easy to tell. You don't have to make this big thing about it, but it is a marketing category. It means that the book is written for teenagers. So usually the 12 to 18 range. It is targeted to teenagers. It is not targeted to adult. That gets into a whole other, I could do a whole presentation on adults in YA and colonization in that sense. But the short answer, it's very easy to check. All you got to do is ask the publisher or look in the BISAC. It's very easy.
All right, so the appeal of romance for adult readers. So the overall appeal is the main characters recognizing that they have a romantic relationship, which can be an HEA, a happily ever after, or an HFN, a happy for now. You don't know what happens 10, 15, 20 years into the future, but at the end of this book, at this point in time, they are happy together. That is what genre romance readers are looking for. As far as the characters, everybody gets their HEA. So it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what your circumstances are, everybody gets an HEA. Everybody deserves an HEA. And even if it doesn't look like what we would fancy for ourselves, it's not just valid, but it's also accepted and cherished and celebrated, which wasn't always the case, but it is the case now. When we talk about pacing, well, let me go back to HEA for a second, because every couple of months, someone will come along and say, well, I wrote a romance and they're not happy at the end and it's still a romance. And it is not a romance. It is a tragedy if somebody dies at the end or any other thing. It's general fiction. General fiction is fantastic. We love general fiction. Women's fiction can be general fiction. Just about anything that doesn't fall into some other genre can be general fiction. But it's not a genre romance. To have a genre romance, you have to have a central love story and a happily ever after or an optimistic ending. That's just the definition of romance. So write whatever you like, but when romance readers are coming to the book, they know that no matter what ensues in that book, no matter who the characters are in that book, at the end, they will get their deserved happily ever after or happy for now. Okay, pacing. So we talk about things like fast-paced or slow burn, and that can apply to the romance specifically. It can also apply to the narrative. And so when people come to the desk and they're asking for things like that, it can apply either place. So a reader for every romance, yes, and a romance for every reader. There is something literally for everybody. And again, it didn't always used to be this way, but the romance genre, no matter what problems it has opened up the big tent a lot since the past 10, 15 years. And there is literally something for everyone. And no matter where or when you go, so historicals or future, no matter what, you know exactly what you're going to get in a romance. And that is a feature of romance, not a bug. So while you know where you're going to end up, how you get there is the fun. And now let's talk about YA romance.
It's basically a lot of the same thing. The same romance tropes for adults apply to teens. Romance in the YA category gets a little fuzzy as it often crosses over with other genres. the capital R romance exists. Obviously, it tends to be rom-coms for YA. But often you see lowercase romance blended in with other genres. So fantasy romance, which is now called romantasy for some reason, sci-fi and romance is a dominant theme in young adult fiction right now, regardless of the other genre you're working in, regardless of whether it's capital R genre romance. Take that as you will. You can have a lot of feels about it. Again, I could do a whole separate talk about that. But capital R romance has the same, in YA fiction, has the same rules and regulations as in adults. But there's some kind of key things that you need to pick out when you're thinking about doing RA or romance for teen readers. Romance for teens, and I mean this as a capital R romance, it's a way to safely explore romance and sexual activity for teens. I don't know if you keep up on the stats with teens and sexual activity, sexual engagement, things like that. It's actually dropping. A lot of teenagers are not dating. They're not having sex, however you want to define sex. And this is a way that they can kind of test the waters or explore, see what kind of things they might like, what kind of things they might not like. It kind of gives ideas. One of the things I always wish I had as a kid is I wish I had had A-spec romances and aerospec romances as a kid, because then I would have been like, oh, hey, is that a thing? That's an option. So like seeing queer romance and not realizing that you are queer, that this is something that you can have. It's a great, you always hear the phrase windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. Romance is a great way to do that for consent, for healthy relationships. It can also show toxic behaviors. Give kids an example of what you shouldn't be experiencing. And if you are experiencing these things, maybe it's time to get out of that relationship. And here's how you can do that. I mean, it's also fun. It's also wish fulfillment. If you are someone like me, it is also completely made up. And I'm still like half convinced you allos are just sort of like lying about this whole romance thing. I don't think it's real. I think it's fake. Birds are fake, the earth is flat, and romance doesn't exist, but it's still fun to read. And so I can still enjoy it as like a fantasy element. I read a lot of romance and I find it a lot of fun.
Now we're going, I love this, by the way, I love this, going to the dark side here. I love this meme that Alex made for this slide because it combines both romance and horror. And anyone who knows me knows we'll talk a lot about Stephen Graham Jones, which is coming up later. But so the appeal of horror for adult readers. So let's switch gears, different slide color to help you do that. The first thing that is the most important, if we want to talk about that happy ever after, happy for now in romance as the most important thing, the tone and the mood are the most important thing in a horror book. The book must provoke terror. Like if you don't want to be scared, don't read horror. I'm not going to force it on you, right? But it also does give voice to fears. It has that uneasy atmosphere. It is a really great place to test the waters as well with just different feelings. So what I really like to talk about with this, though, is that it does this from the start. The very first page of a well-done horror novel or story or novella or whatever you're reading will start with something that is unsettling and uneasy. And 99% of the time, that unsettling and uneasy thing has nothing to do with the scary story that's coming. It's just there to set the tone that these are going to be a little off kilter. So for example, I just finished and turned in a review that'll be in Booklist for the new Chuck Tingle, Bury Your Gaze. And it had a perfect example of this. The first scene is a line of cars waiting to get into the Hollywood studio where he works. And for some reason, there's a line. There's never a line. And then that's causing this like uneasy feeling for everybody. And it ends up being slightly connected, but it is not what the story is about. That's the kind of thing you see. So that has to be pervasive, and it needs to build and get to a deeper level, although we'll talk about how scary later. There have to be sympathetic protagonists. I cannot stress this enough. There have to be characters that are sympathetic, but there also have to be real life characters you hate, because the most horror stories have a person or people that are going to, win in the end. And then the one that is going to die that you're not so sad that they died. And this helps to increase the tension and the fear and everything. But here's what I like to say. If you don't care about the protagonist, the one who is under all this stress, trying to stop whatever supernatural monster is there, if you don't care about them, then why are you reading the book? You just want them to get eaten by the monster and move on or killed. So you have to have that in there. So readers who read horror, yes, we want to be scared, but we also want characters we can root for, just like a romance, by the way. Now, the pacing, all horror books have their own pacing as well, but all of them, wherever they begin, they must slowly get faster. And you will see this in everything. So we start at whatever pace we're at, but it does have to increase. And usually the last third, you want to make sure the last third of the book, whatever number of pages that is, you need to just be aware that you're not going anywhere for that last third. Like if you have plans, cancel them or wait to read the last third. And I'm noticing over a lot more often too, right at the 50% mark, there's the big twist. I just noticed that in my notes on Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle as well, almost exactly to the page. In terms of style and language, there are lots of adjectives I already mentioned, but there also are often quirky things that happen in horror books, such as found footage, lost documents, diary entries. A recent trend is a lot of horror books about movies that use screenplays, something that takes the story and adds another level of unease to it, and flashbacks. Flashbacks are extremely common in horror. Again, almost every horror novel uses flashbacks in some way. Why? Two main reasons. One, it is a way to pull you out of the story. It's like a little cliffhanger type thing. And so it gives you a break from whatever intense thing is going on as a reader, which sometimes you need, but also it also takes you back to a time when things were going a little bit better. And you can see though where the story might have been, what might have started, where it was building up. So it's important to have flashbacks for that. And in terms of storyline, you need to expect speculative elements. I get a lot of people who are like, well, I love serial killer novels. And then I went and tried a horror novel and I was like, but these are not real. And I'm like, yes. Or the opposite. There's a lot of horror readers who are like, I can't do true crime because those are real monsters. Do not underestimate how important that is. Don't just run and give a psychological suspense novel or true crime that's bloody and scary to someone who reads horror, because that speculative element creates, for many people, that level of separation, making it fantasy. Whether it's for teens or adults, there's always some kind of coming of age in a horror novel. The protagonist must overcome something that has been limiting them as a hero, to be the hero or heroine. It is that protagonist has to overcome something and figure out something about themselves. And those of you who want a closed ending, horror does not always have that. In fact, mostly it's whatever that conflict is gets resolved, but the horror keeps living on, and it's going to still be there. And then finally, don't forget in storyline that this is a place where readers can face their own fears and escape real life horrors and sort of look at the dark side of humanity from a safe space. It is a really important thing. You hear this a lot. The world is a dumpster fire, so I go to horror because it's even worse. Some people go to romance because it's even better, right? And then horror can take place anywhere and everywhere. Like Robin said, where or when, right? It can be in the future, it can be in the past, it can be now, it can be in a deserted wood, or it can be in a big city. You can be in the middle of a big city and set up one of the scariest, most isolated stories that you would ever think about. So there's something for everyone. And I like to talk about this because it's good. I'm going to give you a romance and a horror setting and show you how the setting can be changed to enhance the mood. So you can have a person driving in a car, going off to a beach. It's a bright sunny day. The wind is in their hair. They get there, they open the curtains, they look out on the water, and it's a wonderful, wonderful day. And there's a knock at the door. You're not expecting anything bad, right? You're expecting something great. Or it's night, it's raining. That person is driving in a car, looking behind them to see if anyone's following, gets in that same house at that same island, blocks the door, bolts it, puts furniture up against it, and then there's a knock at the door. So you want to think about it that way.
So again, same tropes in YA horror as you get in adult, the same sort of features that you get in adult fiction. But again, I think horror, like romance for teen readers, capital H horror and also lowercase h horror, People lump them into like genre, and we don't give teens genre fiction because they're not real books. We want them to read real books. And I was like, I don't care about that. Everything is a real book if they're reading it. So horror in particular can be really important for teen readers. It's a way to safely explore difficult experiences. Again, like with romance, it can be a way to process trauma or to sort of recognize abuse, violence, things like that. Sometimes if you've gone through something traumatic, reading about someone else going through something traumatic, it's kind of cathartic. It can help you process. It's also a good reminder for teens that whatever terrible thing that they're going through right now, and teens are going through a lot of terrible things, even if they're not telling you about it. It can be a way to be like, oh, I might actually survive this. It's a way to see that survival in other people. I really, really dislike the term reluctant readers because it places the blame of the not reading on the student, on the reader themselves. But it is a common term that we use. I just say, readers who haven't found a book yet. But horror can be a great way to get in those quote unquote reluctant teen readers. Middle grade horror is very popular. And if you give a teenager a horror book, especially if they're ones who really liked middle grade horror, that can be a great sort of door opener. It also really is important for normalizing marginalized identities. Everybody gets chopped up by the serial killer, regardless of your race or your queerness or whatever. It doesn't matter who you are going to be the target of that evil monster living in that house. So it's really important that way. And it's just fun. I do want to touch back on some comments that I saw earlier, talking about YA romance, just very briefly. So for lowercase romance, good luck in not finding that in YA fiction right now. I would say probably close to like 90 to 95% of YA fiction, regardless of genre right now, has some kind of romance subplot, usually with the protagonist. Good luck. I don't know what to tell you. It's the way things are. I don't particularly like it. My teens don't particularly like it. There's a big desire for comedy or non-romance storylines with protagonists. That's not what we're getting out of the publishing industry right now. And that's not what publishing industry is buying from authors who are selling it. As for capital R romance, it's pretty easy to find books that are not capital R romance, but that lowercase, sorry, man, we're all kind of stuck in the same boat. Same reason we don't have a lot of comedy. It's the same reason we are only getting horror, YA horror right now. You go back 5 years ago and there were like 4 books, and now we actually have a lot of YA horror. So it's the current trend is just romance is everywhere. Lowercase r romance is everywhere in YA fiction.
And to that end, let's talk about romance a little bit more. So when you're talking with people, one of the ways that you can start that conversation, or they will start that conversation with you, is with tropes. Or I call them story identifiers. They're ways to identify what you're going to find on the inside of that book. They're super important right now to romance marketers and publishers because they draw people into books. If you tell someone, it's kind of a shorthand. If you tell someone it's a friends to lovers, then they know what to expect from that book. If you tell them it's enemies to lovers, they know what to expect from that book. So it's kind of a shorthand, but don't fall into the trap of thinking that everybody uses tropes or only picks books because of tropes, because that is not true. It's what the publishers and marketers want you to think. It's what Book Talk wants you to think, but it's not true. They are very useful. I will not deny that. They're not just useful to pick books. They're also useful for people who know that they want to stay away from certain things. If they do not ever want to read a marriage of convenience book, they just don't believe in that, in being coerced into marriage. They never want to read that. That is an easy way to say, these are not for you. Let's look over here at this other trope. So it's something that's well used, but it's not the be all end all. And if romance is not your chosen genre to read, and you're looking to help someone, it's easy to throw the trope plus romance novel into Google, and you will get dozens of lists of books that will give you a head start on helping your patrons. You can also check out novelists, and they also have tropes listed. And it's just a way to get started because the romance genre right now is large, very, very large, even just with current titles. And then you add backlist, and it could be overwhelming, especially if you have someone in front of you and you just want to help the person and you have no idea where to start. Google is a great place to start. So another way that we can include or exclude things from suggestions are with the characters. So yes, everybody gets an HEA, but readers may not want to read about everybody's happily ever after. One of the hot subgenres in romance right now is dark romance. And that has at its core a less sympathetic main character. And sometimes all the main characters are less than sympathetic. Some people run straight towards it. That is exactly what they want to read. And we see this in media as well, with your TV shows, your Sons of Anarchy, things like that. Criminals, but we love them. Some people run actively away from it because they deal with bad people all the time. Why would they want to spend their leisure time reading about those same people? So people will tell you that romance is plot driven, and it's also very character driven. Not every reader wants to spend that much time in a character's head when they hate the main characters. And while redemption can be a powerful plot and character driver, yeah, not everybody wants mafia stories or motorcycle club stories or criminals or reformed Nazis. No, thank you. So sex. It's the land of euphemisms in romance. Two of the main terms for books with no sex are clean and sweet. I'm going to beg you, actually, please never use those terms, especially clean. But those are the terms that you'll see marketed, so you need to know what they are and what they mean. And basically, they mean books that have no sex on the page. So the best way to gauge how hot a reader wants their stories to be is just to ask. It's super awkward. It doesn't have to be super awkward. But I understand that it can be awkward. And the best way is just through. How much sex on the page are you comfortable with reading? You can also ask about comp authors, and they will generally tell you 80% of the books are all labeled as hot. And that means that there are some sex scenes on the page. And then you have both ends. You have no sex on the page, and then you have erotic romance, which is erotica with a happily ever after or a happy for now. That has to be there. And other things that we can talk about are writing style, historical context or accuracy. Some people want their historical romance to be A+ accurate. Other people don't care at all. So lots of intangibles that help people find or discard books.
Sorry, I guess it's my turn. The RA conversation with adult horror readers. So it's going to be slightly different because we're still dealing with emotions. So unlike sex, we're dealing with, again, these emotions of being made to feel scared. And it is a primal fear. So it is something that you have to ask people about. I saw people earlier saying, what do you want to be scared by? Or what do you not want to be scared by, right? These are questions. But remember, we're giving people stories that are going to spark a real feeling. I'm not kidding. I read a book, The Grip of It by Jack Jemick once, and I had to leave my house. I couldn't literally be in my house. All right. And I read a lot of these. And again, we don't want to force horror books on people who don't want to be scared. Not everyone likes being scared. And it is not a feeling that you have to make people have. So we want to make sure we're clear with that. When we are talking about the comfort level with how much violence and gore and all of this, you really need to use the language in reviews. Now, Susan McGuire, who's on here, and I did, she's a self-professed fraidy cat, and she edits my horror reviews. And we did this article a couple of years ago. We had a lot of fun building it. It was a book list article with, and it's still on Booklist Reader. You can click there and read it for free. It's about addressing horror levels, and we gave example books, and we really explained 4 different levels of horror. But what I like to talk about is look at the words in reviews to help you, or on the back of the book. Is it atmospheric? Is it creepy, right? Those are a little bit less. If people use words like intense, right? Or scary, that's in the middle. But when you see like visceral, terrifying, like it's going to be a lot more. Visceral is a word I tend to use in any review when I know that it has a lot of gore. And you'll see that across the board because reviewers want to make sure it's clear to people. And here's the other thing, by the way, every author doesn't write at the same scare level for all of their books. So you can't say, well, I read this Grady Hendrix book and it wasn't that visceral, so I can read all of them. No, you cannot, right? And authors also use different tropes. So like, and I'll use Grady Hendrix as an example. If vampires are scary to you, you can't read one of his books. If you're afraid of creepy clown puppets, do not read How to Sell a Haunted House, right? So you have to be aware of these things as well. So how do I like to assess their entry point? I tend to go with those traditional appeal factors that I already went over. I ask them things like, do you mind a speculative element? Do you like feeling scared? Is, an overall sense of terror throughout 300 pages okay with you? The answer for Robin is not, but the answer for me is yes, right? And then go into those themes or tropes similar to when we talk about romance. So in this case, these are some popular themes or tropes: revenge, body horror, clowns, I already mentioned, evil kids, small town. There's a whole bunch of them. Cults are really popular, right? Things you want to look for. Historical, do you want it to be a historical horror? All of this. So those are great ways to talk to somebody about a book. Are you looking for more revenge horror because you read this book? Or what kind of things do you like? And people who like horror, like romance, know these terms and tropes and throw them around. So go with what they tell you and use those words to help you, because again, the reviewers are fans and they are looking to put those in to help you as well. Then there's also the subgenres, right? So vampires, werewolves, cosmic horror, haunted houses, demonic possession. There's so many different ones. Those are also traditional ways to enter in a conversation, because sometimes we have readers, and vampires is a great example. If you take nothing else away from this today, vampires are back. Scary vampires are back. Their books been coming out and they're going to continue to come out. So keep an eye out for that. But some people will read anything with vampires, including romances, right? Paranormal romances. Other people, like a way a certain writer writes and want to follow them, and they all jump around now. When I started doing this, you could count on, that person writes vampires and that's all they write. And that is not the case at all. I like to use Victor Laval as an example. He has written so many different genres within dark fantasy and horror, and different tropes and different subgenres, and even combines other genres. So we have to make sure we're aware, if they like those things, go into lists of those books to help them find it. And like they were saying in the first talk, I always, especially if you are not a horror fan yourself, the very first thing you need to do is to think of popular movies or TV shows that are horror, or ask people about them. Use that as a talking point. Good news, horror movies come out all time of year right now, all times of year. So what, Imaginary just came out the other day. I'm actually reading a book about the new Josh Malerman, I think is a read-alike that's coming out this summer. Incidents Around the House is a read-alike for that movie Imaginary that just came out. And you can use that to have conversations with people. Well, what horror media do you like? And then there's tons of read-alikes. You just put it into Google and you can find read-alikes for those. And I like to use resources with people as I'm talking to them. to demonstrate that we use resources when we help you, right? I know a lot of people think when they do readers advisory, they're supposed to just know everything. You can't and you don't. And people know that library workers know how to find information. So I often use resources while I'm talking to people to see how they feel. So if they mention a book, I might go to Goodreads and look at 4-star reviews and 2-star reviews, because 5-star don't really add anything except they love the book, and 1-stars are haters. And sometimes they're haters for racist and, homophobic reasons. So we just throw those out. But 4-star and 2-star tend to say why the book didn't get the one above or below. And that's really good for that.
Before I move to the next slide, I just wanted to touch on, because it's basically the same with YA, the RA conversation with YA for romance and adult horror, or romance and horror is basically the same for teens. Same tropes, same settings, same emotions you want to go through and kind of dig into with your patrons. But I will say with YA horror in particular, it tends to be less gruesome. And that's a pretty important part. Not that there's not violence and blood. What's the new one by Sigrid Ellis? I'm blanking on the name. It's set at a summer camp and it just came out and I'm totally blanking on the name. Maybe somebody can Google it. It's really violent and bloody, but it has a different kind of vibe and tone. Yeah, I mean, you may see a lot of death and blood. You're not usually watching scene after scene after scene of somebody getting like ripped apart or something like that. Some of it may be a little off the page, like the person actually dying may be off the page, but then you come back and there's the undead corpse, threatening to eat somebody. A kind of good dividing line, I reviewed this book called Frostbite, which there was a big debate between the publisher about whether it was YA horror or adult horror. They sided with YA horror. I read it. It was definitely adult horror. The violence level was adult horror violence level. So it can be a little fuzzy, but that's kind of, if you're looking for something a little softer, that's actually a good recommendation too for adult horror readers or who may want to try horror, but may not be ready for something a little more violent. Try recommending a YA horror. Okay, and now, so because I didn't want to just do like ditto to Robin and Becky, I'm going to tell you how I do readers advisory for my teenagers. I work at a high school. I have been working in high schools for too many years at this point, a good like half of my library career. Been working with teens my entire library career. I have a very footloose and fancy-free way of doing readers advisory. It's a little different than what was done in the first presentation. It's very different from how I was trained. I started in public libraries, and when I sat down to do readers advisory for a child, for like a 7-year-old, they gave me like a double-sided page document and said the interview should take about 30 minutes. And I was like, ah. So here's how I do readers advisory for my high school students. I do a lot of just pushing books. I walk up to kids. I do a lot of pop-up libraries at my school. I just offer books like, hey, come check out this thing. I often hand books. I don't throw books, although I have actually thrown books at kids before. But I often just like hand a book to a kid and just walk away. Like, here, go read this. And it works really well, especially with the kids that I have that kind of relationship with. I often just like walk up and here you go, check this book out. You need to take this book home with you. And I do the stack of books. One of my favorite things to do, not just for book bundles, but when a kid will ask me for a book recommendation or I need something to read, my favorite thing to do, you can't really do this in public libraries, but I do this a lot in schools. I will take a stack of books. I will pull about 5 to 10 books, kind of based on the things that they've suggested to me of what they like, what they don't like. I will also include a stretch book or sometimes 2 stretch books. So something that they said, I am interested in trying this, or maybe I didn't like this, but I'm not against the genre, or I'd be willing to try this, or I don't usually read this. That's my stretch book. And so it'll have a lot of ties to whatever they've liked. It might have some tropes for the romancy stuff, but there might be a little bit of scare in there, whatever it is. So, and then I just leave the stack of books and I let the kids go through, pick out as many as they want. Whatever they don't want, they can put right into the returns box. I don't label the books so that the other kids don't know whose stack is whose, but it's right there at the circ desk. They can go. I don't sit at the circ desk. I sit in my office because it's near the printer, and that's what has all the problems all the time. But the kids have free access to it, and then they can just pull whatever they want. And then we have sort of a trusted relationship where they know to come back and talk to me about the things that they did like and didn't like, so that I can better tweak their recs. But I'm a big fan of book stacks.
Alex, when I did our YA in the public library, I would like talk about a book and then just toss it on the table and go get another one and talk about it and just make it look like I didn't care because someone else mentioned that in the comments. Like they feel like, we think that if we say it, they have to take it. I would just throw it down all over and scatter them and let them go later.
I often will walk through the stacks with the teens, like, come with me. And then I just start pulling books off the shelf and hand into them. And it's like, take your time, go through whatever you like. Like I said, leave whatever you don't want. If none of these work, come back and talk to me and I'll go. But I don't watch them go through the books. Teens, in my experience, they don't want reader's advisory in that formal sense. What they want is to feel like they're getting a recommendation. They want to know, like, I don't tell them if I don't like a book, you could not pay me to read the Iron Flame books. And yet I will still recommend those to certain teen readers who I know will really like that. And Sarah J. Maas, who again is not another person that I will personally ever read on pain of death. But there are a lot of people that really like those kind of books. I don't tell my teens what I don't do and don't like. If they're excited about something or excited about a genre and want to read it, I am excited about that genre. And I want them to feel like they can come to me for recommendations and not get judged. And it's really, really important. You get that with adults too, but with teens, even the slightest hint of judgment from an adult will throw them off and they won't touch that. They won't touch that genre again for years, or that author. So I am 100% super supportive and excited about whatever it is they've asked me for. What you see on screen is a screenshot of my current book recommendation form that the kids fill out. I often change the last question. Right now, it's if you got a literary tattoo, what would you get it as? Just to kind of add some fun in there, something different. But this is literally all that I ask. And some kids get really into it with their answers. Some kids get really short. Some kids just say, I don't know. And that's fine with me. But I try to and I do use YA as a genre term just because, like I said, that's how they're understanding it. Reader's advisory forms is not the place to have the conversation about what a marketing term is. But I do this is all I ask them. What do you want me to call you? Looks like my pronouns is not on there. I took off the pronouns because we have a system in our school where I know all the pronouns now, but I would add a pronouns section if you're asking for students. But yeah, what are you interested in? What are you not interested in? I don't get deep at all. I just tell me what you like, what you don't like. And then I pull, we do book bundles for like spring break, winter break, but also this is just general reader's advisory. And I will pull a stack of books for the kids to look at based on those recommendations. I just try to keep it very easy, very short. This form takes 2 minutes to fill out and they're good to go. And it's been pretty popular. So again, teenagers in particular don't want to feel like they're having, or at least in my experience, they don't want to feel like they're having like this formal interaction. In fact, in my previous school, I just walk down the hallway and all of a sudden can I get a book, doctor? Like, yes. Okay, so let's talk about it. Stop everything. Let's talk about it and go. Yeah, so I tend to do it very quickly. 7-minute mark. Okay,
yes, go. Getting books, we got them.
So we talk a lot, so I'm going to go kind of fast through these. These are in rough order from no sex on the page to all the sex on the page. A lot of people want less sex in their books, but they don't necessarily want a religious romance. But for a long time, that was the shortcut to, I don't really want any sex on the page, and you would hand them an Amish romance or some other kind of religious romance. And people were like, yeah, I don't really want the religion either. So we have the first 3 books are more on the no sex on the page, and the first 2 actually have 0 sex on the page. None of them are religious, and they all tap into that deep feeling of emotion. I think I cried at 2 of the 3. So you will absolutely, or patrons will absolutely love them and be gratified if they're looking for books with no sex on the page. And then, so the next 4 books are what we would call hot. They're regular levels of sex on the page. Anna Maria and the Fox is a historical novel talking about things we may not have known regarding Mexico and London, and Napoleon. So if you're looking for a historical romance that's going to talk about maybe parts of history that were not well taught, and make them interesting. It isn't just talking about history, it's also making it interesting while having a central love story and a happily ever after. That is one I would pick up. And the last 3 are all erotic romance. They're all super hot. If you're looking for the sexy of the sexiest sex books, those are the 3 that you want. And I recommend every single book on this slide.
I'm not going to go one-on-one through all of these. They're great. Order them. Bite Me, Royce Taslim, and Prince of Palisades. I don't think are out yet, but they're coming out. A Girl's Guide to Love and Magic is the only new book on here. It does say love, but there's not really there's a romance, but they're 14. Okay, they're 14. The reason I put it on there is because if you are aware of YA fiction at all, you will know that YA fiction has been aging up pretty drastically in the last few years. We actually have more YA fiction in this. I keep track of speculative YA fiction. There were more speculative YA fiction novels published last year with like 18 and 19-year-old characters than there were with 14-year-olds. So that's why I put A Girl's Guide to Love and Magic on it. It's one of the only it's the only 14-year-old romance I can think of, and it's a little fantasy. Anyways, all of these are great. The Kindred is on here too because it is a spec. There's a demi character. It's a great example of how you can do a spec romance. And then Always and the Almost and Most Ardently are both trans romances, YA romances. So it's really and Miss Meteor has trans stuff going on as well, and both of the authors are trans as well. Lots of great stuff. I'm going to admit I don't read cishet romance, and I don't read white people books. So for the most part. But I always try to like keep aware of everything that's out there, everything that's happening, to make sure that when I am doing reader's advisory for my teenagers, I am recommending diversely. That doesn't mean I'm not recommending cishet romance, but it means that I'm not only recommending cishet romance. So that's why I made this mostly queer and mostly BIPOC rec list, because you can go anywhere and get a list of YA romances that is all white people and like one black book. So we're going a little opposite here.
And that's one of the things I try to represent in mine as well, because horror, the biggest trend in horror, and almost all of these people represent that, is the fact that who you are is horrifying to live in this world. So a lot of these authors on here, in fact, I think the only straight white people are Rachel Harrison and Paul Tremblay. Yeah, that's it. So Cassandra Caw is non-binary. Eric LaRocca you need to have Eric LaRocca books. This one is coming out from Titan. I think it's his best collection he's had. His entire thing is, I want to show queer people being messy. We don't have to be perfect, right? So his characters, you're like, oh, why are you making those choices? They're not all good people who are, and it's fantastic. I also have a range of scares here, from The Fervor, which is Alma Katsu's historical horror, Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay, which is not just a great story about a possession, is it or is it not? He is that author. It's also about reality TV and all these other things. It also is the start of the trend in horror right now of the new authors. It's like the 21st century classic, that, and then The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. But what's great about Paul Tremblay, he also walks that line. Every single one of his books is it supernatural or is it real? And so that's a great book for people who are on the spectrum, the fence there. Mexican Gothic is just an all-out perfect book, right? It's a perfect example of horror today. You have the traditional European Gothic story told from a Mexican point of view, and it just has a little bit of everything in it. I'm going to talk about Gabino Iglesias, who writes very violent books that are also extremely beautiful and lyrical. His new one is coming out this summer, but this one won the Shirley Jackson and the Bram Stoker. And of course, as I said, I promised I would mention Stephen Graham Jones. I have two here because I am on record as saying The Only Good Indians is one of the best books written this century. It is a near perfect book. I will say he's also great for teens. These are not YA, but I met a teen the other day who told me The Only Good Indians is her favorite book. It does have a teen heroine at the end of the story. You can go look it up. And My Heart in a Chainsaw is on here because Jay Daniels is my final girl. I hope she's everyone's. The trilogy is ending. I've read it. It comes out in like a week. It is one of the most, I called it in Library Journal, the series, the entire trilogy, a gift. This is a gift. This is the stand for our generation. The ending is near perfect. If you don't cry, something is wrong with you. So those are the examples of books. And then we have a slide just with our information. Oh no, you have yours. Sorry, the teen.
Sorry. Very quickly, again, I'm not going to go through these one-on-one. They are predominantly queer. They are predominantly BIPOC. Again, for the same reasons, if you Google YA horror, actually, I'm going to tell you this. Do not Google YA horror book lists, because most of those books will not actually be capital H horror. They will be dark fantasy, or they will have some scary stuff. They will not be horror because people do not understand what horror is as a genre. And they will also often be majority white and majority cis and majority het. So again, my list is not that. If you are looking for a reader, or if you have a reader who says, oh, I don't like horror, but I'd like to try it, or is kind of on that fence, A Guide to the Dark is great. Very low. It's like the lightest horror I think I have ever read. I read a lot. I read almost all of the YA queer horror that comes out every year. And it is the lightest horror I've ever read. It is still horror, but it's great. What Stalks Among Us is weird and trippy. It's great because there's a fat protagonist, which if you read YA fiction, there's not a lot of that. Hell Followed With Us is a great new twist on trans horror. And I'm going to speak quickly about queer horror specifically, and I mean that it's a capital Q, capital H. So Hell Followed With Us and The Honeys in particular use queerness. Like, you cannot take the queerness out. Queerness is part of the horror. The thing that the characters are experiencing, their queer identities, is deeply tied in and is part of the horror. And it's very, very, very powerful. So I recommend all of these. Super great. And yeah.
And then we have a slide with our information. You will get all of these links. We can stop sharing so they can share the booklet slides. You will get, people were asking, you will get all of these, the links and the slides. So don't worry about it. You can reach out to us. And I think we answered all the questions while we were going. So thank you for your time.
Yes, thanks for having us.
Thank you so much, Robin, Alex, and Becky. That was an amazing marathon of goodness. We will now take a very short break before our final workshop, Crafty and Concise Book Blurbs, which will begin in just a few minutes. While you wait, please enjoy these resources and recommendations from our sponsors, Penguin Random House Library Marketing and Sourcebooks.